Our next panel is Disruptive Women in the Driver's Seat. This panel is sponsored by PAVE, Partners for Automated Vehicle Education. Our moderator for this panel is Alisyn Malek. She's the Executive Director for the Commission on the Future of Mobility and also the co-founder and CEO of Middle Third, a boutique mobility consultancy. Prior to this, Alisyn co-founded May Mobility and started her career as an engineer at General Motors. Welcome, Alisyn.
Thank you so much. So excited to be here and to host this panel for everyone.
We're excited to have you. Let me introduce the rest of our panelists. We have Jade Hill, who's the program manager at Toyota. She's responsible for federal and state regulatory policy on autonomous vehicles and has a bachelor's of science in mechanical engineering from Virginia Tech. Welcome, Jade. We also have Dr. Shani Jayant, who leads the Inclusive Mobility Initiative at Volkswagen Group of America and as a UX research and design manager in the newly formed car software organization. Dr. Shani has worked extensively with the blind and low vision community and has a PhD from the University of Washington and a bachelor's of science and mathematics, computer science, and music from New York University. Welcome, Dr. Shani. And next we have Dr. Anuja Sonalker, founder and CEO of Steer. Steer is focused on developing secure self-driving technologies. In addition, Dr. Sonalker is currently the vice chair of the SAE Vehicle Cybersecurity Systems Engineering Committee. Dr. Sonalker holds a PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Maryland, College Park. Alisyn, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, and thank you to our panelists. Very much looking forward to the conversation today. To kick it off, the question that I actually wanted to have each of you answer is just wanting to understand what prompted each of you to get into the AV field. So I'm going to start with Jade, if you could share how you landed in this space.
Sure. Thanks so much for having us on today and this awesome workshop. I actually kind of fell into this space. So I actually always wanted to work in automotive safety since high school. I went to an engineering summer camp in high school and just kind of fell in love and fascinated with automotive safety. And so that was kind of the path and charge I was on as I went through school and college. And I'd always wanted to work for Toyota. And so when I was finishing up school and applying for jobs, I pretty much applied for as many positions as possible. The one that landed is this job in Toyota's Washington, D.C. office, which it was focused on regulatory affairs, but on kind of emerging technologies. And at the time, V2V, vehicle-to-vehicle communications was kind of a big interest area and a big topic for us. And so I started in that position, which was around 2013. And very shortly after that, AVs started to explode, I think, with the increased prominence of the testing in California and some of the legislative and regulatory activities that came out of there. So that's kind of how I just kind of fell into it. I always wanted to work in safety.
Great, thank you for that background. And Shani, let's go to you next. What brought you to the AV space?
Yeah, so I actually had no prior experience or actually really interest in automotive before this job. So I was approached specifically because the team that I ended up working for at the time, they were looking for a researcher and a designer with experience working with people with disabilities. And I had gotten my PhD in human-computer interaction around accessible technologies for people with disabilities, and have worked in various jobs working with people with sensory and physical disabilities. Yeah, just like really honestly never really thought much about AVs, but then once I started learning more about them, the promise of them to provide more transportation for more people who need it, and for people who might not be able to drive themselves or have access to accessible ride shares or public transit, this really called to me. So yeah, I think this is something that's still years away, in its full-fledged form. So I was excited that we have a chance to really make sure we do the design the right way with the right people. including with older adults and people with disabilities, people in rural communities, and yeah, just making AVs as accessible and usable as possible. So a bit of a random start into the journey.
Great, thank you for sharing. Anuja, will you share how you've brought yourself into the autonomous vehicle space?
So my journey in the autonomous vehicle space comes from cybersecurity. I have been 2 decades of, building secure systems, a decade out of which was spent in the auto industry. This is actually my third startup in the automotive space. And when I was building security products here, I noticed that, cybersecurity was moving from being pen testing and vulnerability testing business, which is sort of like you're trying to break systems to find where the problem areas are, to quickly focusing on how to actually build secure products. And the more I looked at it, the more it felt that, okay, cybersecurity is really going to be a value added multiplier and a mandatory one. So in the core, and it's going to be a piece in the course of development of other functions and features. So I was doing my 5-year horizon planning, and I was looking at what does it mean for the industry. And I felt that 3 big trends, AVs, connected AVs, EVs, and lightweighting really would be the key drivers of the future. So I started studying the AV space, and I realized that, cybersecurity is really a parallel analogous system to safety. So it's about making systems more robust, stronger, so that in the event of failure, in this case in safety, you call it failure because of failure of parts or situations and systems. In cybersecurity, it's failure because some other external adversary attacked you, or there is a malicious angle to it. But they're very, very correlatable. And so I use that moment to actually say that, okay, the next thing I do, I want to be focused on something that's an AV feature. So I'm building an actual product, but it's got a layer of cybersecurity in there. So that's how, Steer was born. And that's how I started working in the AV, specifically the AV field.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to send our next question to Shani. What do you think are the biggest misconceptions about AV today?
Yeah, I'll take this one from the kind of user experience point of view, maybe less from the just core technological point of view. So one of the things we've come across a lot is that, some people have an idea that like everyone's going to have their own AV, and this is definitely one model that might happen, where people might be able to own their own autonomous vehicles. But another model that we're seeing a lot more talk about is the fleet model, where you take something like an Uber or a Lyft, or maybe you have a shuttle for your university or a housing community, and then you'll be able to access these automated vehicles. So that's one thing that I've heard about. Another one is just very general, just like this idealistic AVs is going to solve everything, and they won't. We need to still develop smart, accessible, and like eco-conscious ways of manufacturing the vehicles, charging them, and yeah, making sure they're accessible. So there needs to be a lot of work that goes into making sure that these vehicles are going to be sustainable and fairly serving the communities.
Thank you. Anuja or Jade, is there anything else that you guys would want to add to that?
I think that the biggest misconceptions I've come across AVs are really centered around what AVs are and what they aren't. So a lot of times it's also the fault of, not homogenizing terminology. And so people think that, self-driving means people are not supposed to be paying attention or things like that. People think that, oh, the car can read my mind. If I want to do something, the car knows exactly that. No, these are robotic systems, which means they are either trained or pre-programmed to follow structured approaches. And not everybody thinks like in structure. So it's a non-intuitive way for humans to think like robots and robots to think like humans. So we are getting there. AI is pushing the limits, but AI is not used in all the safety critical aspects as well. So that's something I think that fundamentally we need to increase awareness among people about what AVs are and what AVs aren't. That's where I've seen most of the misconceptions coming from.
Yeah, I would definitely agree and echo to their points. And to what Shani was saying, I don't think it's also needs to be made clear that it's not going to be a snap of a finger and all of a sudden there's the streets are filled with AVs and they're taking your personally manually driven cars away. That's not what it's going to happen. And it's also likely not going to be a one size fits all a solution with AVs. Like right now, there's different levels of AVs, and depending on the use case, the user, you might see different executions of how they deploy and launch automated vehicles, from varying levels to the way that the vehicle looks.
Great, thank you all. This next question will start with Jade. So we've talked a bit about how you all have taken your journey into the autonomous vehicle space and some of the misconceptions that exist in the industry today. Now I want to pivot a little bit more back to how people can actually enter into working on autonomous vehicles. So Jade, if you have any recommendations how someone who's maybe been working in a different field could pivot into the space, that would be great.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities because there's still so much to be done in this space, and the possibilities are kind of limitless at this point. The way that people are thinking about how to use AVs in the future in their communities, depending on what it looks like. Business models are still being developed on how one would launch or use them. So within our company, there's great demand for people to help and support in all of these different areas and in answering these different questions. There's still a lot of research that needs to be done, and a lot of pilots, I think, to be done. So whether you're coming from a business background or whether you're coming from a finance background, even health, I think some of the ideas going forward is what if you have kind of like a mobile clinic, like a clinic that can come and serve a community that might not have access to a major hospital, something like that. So I think anybody can kind of step into the space depending on what your interest is. I think as far as the company goes, just getting your foot into the door, like for Toyota, if you're in Toyota and you want to pivot, you're working in, I don't know, HR, and you want to pivot to another function that's really focused on this transformation in our transportation space, I think it's easier to do that once you're within that company versus coming completely randomly from something that's pretty hard to tie into it. So that would be my one advice for some, especially the younger folks, I think, is getting your foot in the door helps.
Great, thank you. And sort of building on that idea of how to pivot into the industry, Anuja, I'm wondering if you can kind of talk us through some of the other professional opportunities that you see in the space, maybe specifically in the technology or business areas, and how you think we can encourage more women to join.
So high level, right? And then I'll probably walk through some of these that I see on a usual basis. But automated vehicles is an extremely broad field. It's where traditional automotive meets computer science, meets cybersecurity, meets mobility, meets user experience, which is all software. So if you think about broad brushstrokes, it's becoming a software industry on wheels if you just look at the technology aspect. And then you have the business aspect. Rightly said earlier, right? Business models are still being developed. Go-to-market strategies are being developed. Public policy on how to handle these is still not nuanced enough. And so there are so many opportunities. All of these can become careers. So deep dive, if you see on our technology side, I see professional opportunities in engineering disciplines, all kinds of disciplines like mechanical engineering and control systems, robotics, and in computer science disciplines like computer vision and AI and user experience, and then in material science and traffic planning, and then in regulatory and the public policy space and advocacy. So even if you're an environmental science major, you want to start reading about the intersection between what you know and understand and what is going on in this field, and chances are you'll find intersections. You will find that it's stimulating your thought process, and you'll find ways to connect with other people who are doing things here and start your journey into this field. And for the second part of your question, how can we encourage more women? So that's First of all, we have to solve their immediate concerns of work-life balance, right? So even before COVID, this was an issue. But especially with COVID, if you look at the statistics, the number of women dropouts from the workforce is almost 3 times that of men. So first we need to bring them back. So we need to bring, I know this is not a technology answer, but first we need to bring back, robust childcare support services and education services, believe it or not, so that this layer, this fundamental, your more physical needs are taken care of, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That's when we can start encouraging them to again start stepping back into the workforce. And then beyond that, it's about giving them opportunities. A lot of them come back after breaks. This is a field that's going to be around for at least 2 decades. And again, we described all the different kinds of jobs. So it's about, finding what is common with what you have and just starting to work from there.
And I think to your point, the AV industry is sort of the latest and greatest new space that people want to get into, but it struggles in the same way that a lot of fields do. So we can also look outside and find examples of how we can make it easier for women to transition back into the workforce and things like that, which is going to be critical to take advantage of all of the expertise that already exists. So this next question would be great, Shani, sort of continuing to build on this. We've talked a lot about career opportunities. I'm wondering if you could just share any advice about girls and young women interested in the field, if there's any advice that you would give, either on entering or operating in the field.
This really builds on what you were all just talking about and what Jade and Anuja was saying. There's so many different doors to different parts of this field that's still really growing, and there's probably so many more parts of it we don't even know yet. I would really just say, don't try to force yourself to be interested in something that you're not interested in. Like, just trust your instinct into what interests you, and if you're lucky, that also can kind of like mix well with what you're good at, but they're not always the same, and you can work with that, but try to follow through on your instincts a bit. And also someone was mentioning in a previous panel, just like, not just your own interests, but making sure you're joining a team that you really feel good in. It's going to be sometimes even more important than the content of what you're working on. And I think being yourself, like, usually from what I've seen, leads to the most success for people, and everyone defines success differently. So make sure that you have your own internal ideas of like what you're trying to get out of this. That's what I'd say.
Thank you. And Anuja or Jade, do you guys have any other pieces of advice that you guys would share with girls and young women interested in joining the space?
I would say take a leap of faith and make the big leap. You will land on your feet. Start from what you know and where you are, and look for an opportunity that makes sense from where you are coming. There are so many opportunities out there. If nothing else, you can be part of a testing team. You can think about testing scenarios, edge cases. As a human being, we drive cars all the time. How would these work? How would this work in this scenario, that scenario? Even if you have a skill like that, it's so helpful. So just take a leap of faith, make the connections, and jump on board. There are so many opportunities. I'm sure that there are opportunities, and if it's not the right opportunity for you, you quickly learn and you move on. But I would say take a leap of faith and jump.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think a couple of things, and I actually talked about this on a panel I was on last week too. Don't be intimidated if you see, a room full of guys. You are worthy of being there. Don't doubt yourself. Don't doubt your strengths and your skills, because you have a lot to offer and bring to the table that other people don't. What I have heard a lot in the past about women kind of breaking into these fields or into these groups or jobs where it is male dominated is they tend to, if they see like, in some jobs, just go through a quick example, like, maybe you go to an interview, you go and meet all the people in the group and it's all guys. And then maybe they're turned off. They're like, oh, I don't want to work in a group that's full of guys. There's no women. And sometimes for different reasons, but sometimes you just have to be that first one to kind of break that cycle of that group or that industry or that space being all male. and you will then lead the kind of the way and open the door and make it a little more comfortable for other women to kind of break in also. So I would say that is my thing I like to share, is don't be afraid to be that first woman, the only woman in the room. Just, take charge. It looks really good on you.
I think that's great advice. One piece that I would add as well, I imagine we've all gotten different feedback to get as far as we all have in our careers. Take some pushing, and a lot of times we are the only woman in the room, and that's okay. And to get comfortable with that, I found it really is best to be yourself, because otherwise you're going to be uncomfortable trying to be something else. And sometimes you will get feedback that it makes other people uncomfortable. I've been told I'm too direct before, which seems funny because coming from an engineering background, like I thought that's what we wanted. And I imagine that all of us have had some sort of experience where we get feedback that people feel is helpful. But at the end of the day, you will have opportunities to choose which feedback you take and which feedback you don't. And I think that for me would probably be a piece of advice I would have liked to have had earlier in my career. Now we're going to switch a little bit more back to the industry. So this first question is for Jade. Engineering has been a field historically dominated by men, so we did just talk about it a little bit. But why is it so important to have female engineers and female representation at the table? Can you give examples of where you've seen diversity make a difference in a decision or a product?
Yeah, I think just diversity overall is really important to any group and any engineering group. And so I work in more of the regulatory policy space, so I can't say I've had any direct experience in design in my career, but everyone is going to bring a different perspective. And so I think that's really important to have your unique experience, whether it's, your upbringing, what your family looks like around you, and what your day-to-day experiences are going to vary from another person. Not even AV related, but I was just thinking of a moment several years ago in our office. We were moving into a new office. We were testing out new office chairs. And, one of the guys, he was like, "Oh, this chair is awesome. It's great." I hated it because I was wearing a skirt and the seat was really itchy. And I was like, no, this is horrible. Like if we're going to go with this, this chair, we have to change the fabric because it's really uncomfortable. Something he wouldn't have ever thought about because he was wearing slacks. So it's just, it's stuff like that. You just never know what's going to impact somebody else. I was in this class in college and it was really interesting. It was an additive manufacturing class and 3D printing. And we were given a project where we were supposed to create a prosthetic. And one of the guys in my teams, we kind of had a back and forth because I was really, I wanted user feedback and, what do they want in a prosthetic, what's going to make them feel most comfortable and make them happy. And the guy was arguing with me about, he's like, who cares what it looks like or if it makes them comfortable, we just want to make some cool technology. And it was just like, that perspective, you need to kind of have that balance, wherever that guy is now, good luck to that company. But, it's different perspectives are really important to make a great product at the end. And so we need all of the voices, all of the diversity in all of these different groups at every different level.
Thank you. Those are some great examples. Anuja and Shani, I'm wondering if either of you would like to add any examples from your work.
Yeah, this isn't from my work in particular, but I just know that there's many anecdotes about how, seatbelts weren't originally designed for pregnant women, seatbelt heights, just all these very basic things that we take for granted, and car safety, these weren't even updated. The models weren't updated, I think, till sometime in the 90s. Don't quote me on that, but something very shocking, I think. And then in the work that I've done, some of the work where we've been talking about fleet models of vehicles and stuff, the topic when it's just men, often the topic of personal safety just doesn't seem to even come up at all. And that's something, just having more women at the table makes such a huge difference in the design of a product.
Yeah. And, Alisyn, to your point, you said earlier that you got feedback that you were very direct, but I find that in problem solving, men are very direct. They find like the shortest path to the solution, and if it fits 2 or 3 cases, okay, it's done, it's direct. Women on the other hand can solve multivariate problems. Like they are able to take a lot of different parameters into consideration, and they can optimize, and they can propose a solution that is actually more encompassing, maybe 9 out of 10 cases. That I'm generalizing a little bit, but in general, it's just because of culturally and socially, and how women think and behave versus how men think and behave, so that aspect is so important to bring it into your team, into balance, so that you are having all these diverse perspectives to problem solving. I think Jade triggered a memory. Toyota has one of the best examples of how diversity is incorporated into design, product design, right? Cars, everybody uses, women use cars, men use cars, we all use, even the seatbelt example Shani just gave, these are all drivers. But the Toyota Sienna, I think their minivan, is probably the only minivan and the first one to actually have a compartment designed in between 2 seats to put a handbag. It's such an aha moment. I mean, first of all, full disclosure, I don't own a Sienna, I don't drive a Sienna, and Toyota does not give me any shares from their company. But I will tell you that what does a woman do when she gets into the driver's seat? The first thing we do is we fling our handbag onto the passenger seat, or we put it on the floor or behind the, the middle row seat or whatever. And then when you hit a stop sign or a traffic light, now your contents, it's not made for, they're not thinking about us. But this is an example of where in the design phase, you had diverse perspectives brought in. Otherwise, you would not capture something like that, right? So that's such brilliant design. That's the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about how diversity is incorporated into design, to good design.
Thank you so much, Anuja. We have time for a couple more questions. So this next one, I'm going to start with Shani. As we think about our transportation system, AVs really do have an opportunity to dramatically change them. What are the main changes that you see, and what are you most hopeful for? And then I'll open the floor to our other participants.
Yeah, I touched on this earlier, but I'm really hopeful for larger segments of the population, particularly people that have been underserved, like people with disabilities, older adults, people in poorer rural areas in the US, to have more access options so they can do the things that matter in life, like get a haircut, go to the doctor, interview for a job, visit their friends, with their own agency. So I'm really looking forward to seeing more design with people that have been underserved, and also more hiring of people from these groups, instead of just, companies designing things that they think is going to help people and then testing them out. So I've seen a lot of this already starting to happen, and I'm really excited to see where it goes.
Great, thank you. And Anuja or Jade, is there anything that you'd like to add about how you see AVs able to impact the transportation system?
I actually, same with Shani, the access to the people who previously had challenges with, mobility, going from place to place, doing daily activities. And like she mentioned earlier too, the rural, the opportunities in rural locations, that's really exciting as to how that can really flourish their economy too. And people who maybe have not been able to, have access to jobs or different opportunities, this could, has the possibility and potential to really address a lot of those issues. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, me too. I think I would concur. I think AVs, piecemeal. I'm also thinking piecemeal AV because I build piecemeal AV stuff. But having people get access to AV technology, even if it's in short bursts and small applications, so that people become more and more familiar, people will themselves come up with how they use it, and it's going to be a fundamental shift in the way they think, even the choices they make. Should I take an Uber today? Should I drive my own car? Should I get on the shuttle? Should I get on the transit? Even those simple decisions like that will be impacted based on the convenience that AVs are offering in the mix of all of this. And that's going to create a shift in mobility patterns. That's going to create a shift in planning for cities, and smart growth. So there is a lot of it's still yet to play out.
Well, thank you all. I'd like to thank you again for participating, and hand the mic back to Chandrika, our host.
Thank you very much, Alisyn, and thank you to the panel. That was an incredibly interesting panel. I have to say, I have to incorporate that notion of how we design for women and think about them in some of my classes. That pocketbook thing really got me because I'm always flinging it someplace when I get in my car. Thank you to the panel.